Okay. കുഴപ്പമില്ല madam. Hope I am audible. I think you can hear me. Good afternoon, ma'am. Shakila, ma'am. Welcome. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah. Welcome. Most welcome.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Distinguished speakers, Reverend Fathers, and dear audience, let us begin the program with an invocation of God's blessings. So for that, I call upon Devamada CMI Public School, Thrissur, to render the prayer song. എന്താച്ചാ എനിക്ക് മനസ്സിലായില്ല 20 minutes ആകുമ്പോൾ Thank you, Devamada CMI Public School, for that lovely song. It is called Lead Kindly Light by Cardinal Newman. And it was actually Reverend Father Francis Kurisheri who suggested that we go with the song. And I'm sure you agree with me that it was indeed a lovely choice. Now, just a reminder to all our participants, the resource persons will be speaking in about 20 minutes' time. We have the inaugural session before that. And before I take you to the inaugural session, may I give you a brief history of the CMI congregation. CMI is short form for Carmelites of Mary Immaculate. It is the first indigenous religious congregation of India. And I would like to take you to the opening sentences that is there on their website. May I quote them? We are convinced that the aim of all education is the formation of the human person for the fulfillment of his individual and social responsibilities. Now, in case you're wondering how this huge religious scholarly congregation, one of the biggest in the world, such as this CMI, how did they arrive at this profound philosophy on education? Well, the answer to that will take you 190 years back to 1831 on May 11th, when this huge spiritual movement was started by 3 priests of the Apostolic Church of the St. Thomas Christians of India. They were Father Thomas Palikal, Father Thomas Porkura, and Saint Kuriakos Chavra Elias. So these 3 together laid the foundation of the monastery, for the first CMI monastery at Mananam. Later on, Saint Chavra took over the reins from the other 2, and he established the first Catholic Sanskrit school at Mananam in 1846. Now, what was special about the school? Well, it was open to students and seminarians of all castes and religions at a time when society in Kerala limited Sanskrit education only to the upper classes. So in this respect, we may boldly say that Saint Chavra was the first educator to admit untouchables to schools. He also started the system of midday meals and also introduced the provision of providing study materials to the poor students. But above that, he started the concept of Pallikudam, which means each church having a school attached to it. And ladies and gentlemen, with this one genius, bold stroke, this saint revolutionized the entire education system of Kerala from along the length and breadth, because this led to a sprout of schools and education was finally there in Kerala. So we may safely say that Saint Chavra did, in fact, become a trendsetter in the universalization of education. He also started the first printing press of the Syro-Malabar Catholic Church, and in doing so, he was actually anticipating religious, cultural, and intellectual advantages for the Catholic community. And today, the CMI congregation is very, shall I say, flagrantly continuing with this bold initiative started by their mentor, St. Chavra, in that their educational institutions are now harboring all kinds of students, especially the marginalized and the poor sections. In this aspect, CMI Education aims at promoting education that is inclusive, accessible, and would harbor students from all walks of life. CMI institutions also make special efforts to coordinate their educational activities with the aims and goals of the nation so that they could cultivate students who would grow up to be responsible citizens, contributing positively to the nation building task. In this regard, may I give you again a brief rundown, something that you saw in the beginning for the PowerPoint presentation, but I would like to take you through it once again. CMI now has 15 provinces and has made its presence felt in 34 countries. They have 1 deemed university, 1 medical college, 4 engineering colleges, 5 nursing schools and colleges, 10 B.Ed colleges, 39 arts and science and commerce colleges, 90 higher secondary schools, and 200 each of LP, UP, and high schools. What's more, they've even started schools at Kenya, Ghana, and Madagascar regions that were previously totally considered to be inaccessible to education. And that brings me to the point today, the whole purpose behind why we have all gathered here and why CMI fathers have gone to this huge trouble and extent of, arranging this webinar so that we the educators and everyone associated with it would be in some way or the other benefited by this, and we'd get to know about the finer points of the NEP. So you see, way back in 2017, the NCRT conducted a survey, NAS, National Achievement Survey, which discovered a learning crisis in India's education system. For decades and decades, academicians and non-academicians had been clamoring for a revamp of the whole education system. And finally, in July 2020, the Union Cabinet approved the new education policy, which of course replaces the previous National Education Policy of 1986. So this new policy aims at universalization of education from the preschool to the higher secondary level. It aims to bring about 200 crore children back into the fold of open school system. It plans to target 100% gross enrollment ratio for the schools by 2030 and 50% for higher secondary level by 2025. Now, these are tall claims. How much would be able to achieve? That is what we've gathered here to discuss. So it is my honor to call upon the architect behind today's webinar, Reverend Father, the very charismatic and magnetic personality, Reverend Father Francis Kurishedi, CMI, to deliver the welcome address. Father, over to you.
Thank you.
much. Thank you very much, Reverend Father Francis Kurishedi, CMI, for your wonderful welcome. And now may I call upon Reverend Father Jason Varketala, CMI, Director, Anugrah, New Delhi, to introduce the provincial. Over to you, Father Jason. Thank you, Reverend Father Jason Varketala, CMI, for that wonderful welcoming of the provincial and introduction. And now may I call upon our provincial, Reverend Father Dr. Davis Panikal, CMI, to deliver the inaugural address and thereby inaugurate our webinar for today. Father, please. Thank you, Reverend Father Dr. Davis Panikil, CMI, for that wonderful introduction to our webinar today. And before we go over to the next speaker, a gentle reminder to all our participants, if you have any questions or clarifications regarding the topic, you're free to post those in the chat box because we'll be picking those up later on. If you have similar questions, we will be combining them, but please make sure to post your institution name, your name as well. We'd like to read it out, and we welcome your feedback too, which is why we'll be giving you feedback forms. You'll find that in the chat box somewhere midway towards the program, and please do use those, avail those. If only you fill them and return them, would we be able to give you a participation certificate. So we hope you'll keep these two things in mind. And now may I call upon Reverend Father Joyce Elevathingal, CMI, Principal, Christ Academy, Bangalore, to introduce our resource person for today, Dr. Shakila T. Shamsu. Over to you, Father Joyce. Thank you, Reverend Father Joyce Elevathingal, CMI, for that wonderful welcome. And now it is my honor to welcome our resource person for today, Dr. Shakila T. Shamsu, to deliver her thoughts on the NEP.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mary, for inviting me to speak. Greetings to the entire fraternity of the Devamata Provincial of the prestigious CMI congregation. Respected Reverend Father Kurusheri, Reverend Father Davis Panikal, Reverend Father Joyce for his introduction, my speakers, respected Dr. Jay Kumar and Father Anil, directors and teachers of the Devamata Provincial who are gathered here today. Let me first greet you on the New Year 2021 and hope that this year will keep us all safe, healthy and blessed. I am honored that I have been invited again by the CMI congregation for a webinar on the National Education Policy. I had the privilege of speaking at an earlier event and I agreed because I thought that CMI does so much for the cause of education and it's only my duty if I could spread that awareness of what the policy is holding, I could get one more opportunity to speak to you all and interact with you. This particular session is focusing largely on school education, as I understand, and therefore I try within the 20 minutes or so to try and give a snapshot of what we expect as changes and reforms that need to come about in the school education vertical. As a policy, though, the NEP 2020, as rightly pointed out by the esteemed reverends who spoke before me, the policy looks at education in one single continuum, starting from early childhood care education and encompassing all stages of education that we in the policy have called the foundational, preparatory, middle stages, and the secondary stages, going on to look into the changes that need to come about in higher education, embedding within it the technical and the professional education, and the verticals of vocational education, teacher education, adult education, and cross-cutting themes relating to research and technology in education. So the policy is a very comprehensive effort of transforming the entire sector on the entire spectrum and not trying to bring about incremental changes. And it is only natural that this policy, which has come out after almost 3 decades, where in this intervening period, the way people live, the way people communicate, the way they work have undergone massive changes. Technology has come into our lives the way we could never imagine, and where our parents or our grandparents have never even expected that we would have such an individualized way of living because of technology. The kind of research that has come in has sort of shattered the boundaries of scientific knowledge and reached new pinnacles of innovation. At the same time, there are challenges of poverty, of hunger, of pandemics, of other challenges that are causing a lot of distress and angst within the society. And as Reverend Father Panakal had mentioned, it is through education that we can bring about all changes by which we can cope with the challenges, equip our students with the right kind of knowledge, attitudes, and capabilities and skills so that they can prove to themselves and to contribute to the productive development of not only the individual, but to the society, the economy, the nation, and be an active global citizen. The NEP 2020, therefore, has embedded itself, or rather has founded itself, on the 4 pillars of learning, which looks at learning to know, which is the knowledge dimension, learning to do, which is the application of knowledge and the skills dimension, learning to live together and to live with others, which is the aspect of coexistence and sustainable living, and finally learning to be, which is the actualization of one's talents and potentials. Given this foundational pillars on which the NEP 2020 is based, and the fact that we are, as a country, a contributing signatory to the SDG goals, particularly the SDG goal 4, which is what deals with education, to provide inclusive and quality equitable education to all with lifelong opportunities. Based on this theory, the recommendations in school education try to address the learning crisis that is prevalent. And at the same time, I would like to underscore the fact that a policy that comes about is not to say that previous policies were not relevant or that they have not served any purpose. We must acknowledge that the 3 national policies that this country has seen, the third one being the current one, the 2 earlier policies of 1968 and 1986 have done tremendous in contributing to the access and equity within education. It has created new institutional structures. It has sought to transform the way in which curricula is looked at. It has sought to also ensure that the social, regional, and other gaps that are existing are not preventing sections of the society from having equitable access to education. It has also looked at the quality aspect of it. But however, for a new country, which is very, very young, in the initial stages, the questions of quality might take a secondary place, and the questions of access and equity would have taken a greater importance. This policy is trying also to look at other aspects, particularly in the qualitative improvement. In terms of the goals that this policy has talked about, 5 goals, reiterating and reaffirming the goals of access and equity, as well as quality, affordability, and accountability. And it also highlights the 22 cardinal principles on which the recommendations of NEP 2020 are based. The highlight of this cardinal principle is the very first one outlined in the introductory chapter, which says that it seeks to recognize, identify, and nurture the unique potentials of every child and provide for their holistic development or promote their holistic development. And it is based on this principle that the flexibilities that have been brought in and the unshackling of the rigidities, whether it is in the curricular offerings, whether it is in the teaching learning methodologies, have been recommended. So the very first recommendation in school education is addressing a learning divide that exists within our Indian society, where you find a substantial number of parents are able to send their very young ones, the 3-year-olds and the 4-year-olds and the 5-year-olds, to what they call as the play schools or the preschools. What are these schools expected to do? They are actually preparing a child to come into formal learning. They are not supposed to do formal learning. They are only supposed to create a preparatory field for that brain development which is happening within the child, to actually allow that child to learn how to learn as the child will go into the formal learning. And that is why the activities that need to take place in this tender age is based on joyful learning and activity-based learning rather than trying to teach them formal learning. And in fact, there should be no pen and paper or no pencil and paper that a child should be introduced to at that stage. The child can be given crayons, the child can be given clay, the child can be given toys which are environment friendly, all that could be given, and these are being provided for in the play schools. But there is another large segment and the large percentage of the Indian students or the Indian children whose parents cannot afford to send their children to the play schools and the preschools, and they go to what the government runs as the Anganwadi systems. The Anganwadi systems are a part and parcel of the integrated child development scheme of the government of India, and which has been doing yeoman service in taking care of the health and nutrition, the immunization programs, so that our children remain with the right nutritional levels and are healthy. But they are also supposed to look at education. But because an Anganwadi worker is not able to concentrate on so many aspects of a child's development, the education part of it remains quite unattended. While evidence tells us that between the ages of 0 to 6, the brain development that takes place, where the neural synapses in the brain start getting connected, there is absolute scientific evidence to say that unless a child is exposed to this kind of early childhood care and education in that age group, in that very, very critical age group, when that brain development is happening, then it is not possible. If it is not being exposed to that, these neural networks do not connect, and therefore the cognitive development of the child is hampered or hindered or is rendered ineffective, because subsequent learning is forcible learning which is not being supported by the neural networks. And it is this divide that has led this NEP 2020 to make one of the major recommendations on focusing on early childhood care and education, and trying to say that all children between the ages of 3 to 6 will get exposure to early childhood care learning or early learning, which is joyful learning, which will be play-based learning with no formal learning, but actually preparing children for their assimilative capabilities and for their cognitive development. In this exercise, because the governments are divided by the functions that they do, the Ministry of Women and Child will be joining hands with the Ministry of Education, along with the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, as well as the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, to ensure that children belonging to all cross sections of the society come through a system where they will have early learning through multiple strategies that have been provided for in the NEP 2020. These multiple strategies are more for implementing agencies and not for teachers. But as school teachers, you need to understand that even if right now you are not dealing with this age group, as a part of the implementation of the NEP, you will have to at least start addressing the 5 to 6 year olds, which will come within the State Department of School Education. The 3 to 4 and 4 to 5, we still feel we are not yet prepared to actually take it over within the ambit of the school education, and therefore would still continue to remain with the Anganwadi system, with capacity building being done for the Anganwadi workers so that they are actually trained to provide for very, let us say, comprehensive, holistic, what early childhood care learning involves. Therefore, the national curriculum framework that will be brought about, which is a curricular and pedagogical framework for ECE, which is mandated to be done by the NCRT, will therefore also talk about the capacity building for the Anganwadi workers who are having 12th qualification and others who are graduates. So that activity would be taken care by the existing system of Anganwadis, but there will be multiple strategies of co-locating Anganwadis with schools, with preschools, trying to locate them with primary schools, multiple strategies, because India is a very vast country. The layers of preparedness and the developmental stages in which state governments are lying are not necessarily uniform across, and taking these factors into account, multiple strategies have been thought about. Further on, we are trying to think in terms of having a new curricular structure. And I must say, many are trying to understand what is this new 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 structure as against what was the 10 plus 2. Now, we have seen the 10 plus 2 as one which is only a restructuring of the schools in a physical terminology. Whereas what we are saying in the NEP 2020 is that it is again, as I said, evidence-based, that there is something that is called age-appropriate learning. And this age-appropriate learning is related to the developments that happen in our nervous system, particularly in the brain development. And in relation to, therefore, this organic factor, that there is something that happens within the human brain, and that allows for children to learn in a certain manner, has led us to talk about a curricular and pedagogical restructuring and not a physical restructuring. Therefore, schools don't have to reorganize themselves into this new structure that we are talking about. Therefore, there is not much investment in terms of infrastructure that we're talking about. It is only the approach to teaching learning. It is only the approach to the transaction of the curricula, the manner in which you will assess the students, and the kind of pedagogical tools that you will use to provide for better learning, that needs to be changed. And what is that? So we are saying the 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. The first is the foundational stage, which, as I just said, the ECC is embedded within the foundational stage, starting from age 3, going on to age 8. And ideally, what we said in the committee's report, the draft NEP 2019, which is the 484-page voluminous document, we did not want classes at all. We did not want grades at all. We said it is between 3 to 8. Children can be allowed to move as per their abilities and about the competencies that they may achieve. And according to that, they may be allowed to shift. But since we are so structured in the way we think, the NEP 2020 has not done that and has said that we will have the ages between 3 to 6, which is the early child care, and then grade 1 and grade 2, which is corresponding to class 1 and class 2. That's the foundational stage. Then comes your preparatory stage between the ages of 8 to 11. And then the 11 to 14, which is your middle stage. And then the 14 to 18, which is the secondary stage. So the continuum in terms of the age is from age 3 to age 18, covering the entire school spectrum into these 4 stages. And these 4 stages will look at the ECCE as part of the foundational stage. We'll look at also the learning crisis through a new mission mode called the Foundational Literacy and Numeracy Mission. The 3 R's that we were used to of reading, writing, and arithmetic, which we are focusing as being the very strong basis on which foundational learning takes place. That is absent in children, a substantial number who do not have, are coming from the Anganwadi, who do not therefore have a learning preparedness. That learning preparedness not being there, when the child comes into the formal class 1, the child is unable to comprehend what is happening in the class at all, is unable to learn to read, to write, or to do basic counting, or what we call the mathematical abilities. Such a child has a tendency to drop out because the child is unable to understand what is happening in the formal learning system at all. Therefore, we have said that in a mission mode, we need to have a foundational literacy and numeracy mission to curtail the dropouts that are happening maximum in grades 1, 2, and 3. So within the foundational stage, between up to the age of 8 and going on to a spillover of grade 3 in 9, age 9, we will have the foundational literacy and numeracy mission aiming to bring children who have dropped out, try to provide the kind of interventions through social workers and other remedial measures so that they feel that they are actually being taught how to learn so that they can learn how to read, learn how to write, learn how to have the basic counting abilities. Now, this intervention, along with the early learning, we feel at a certain stage, we would have achieved a level playing field. Of course, the time is too ambitious. We have said that we need to ensure that all children who have dropped out will come back into the school by 2025, which is less than about 5 years from now. And the target, any policy would lay down a target, but there could be spillovers. But once you lay down a target, the spillovers would not be excessive. At least it would be within a manageable time period. Coming to therefore, going by this new structure, all that we are saying is there is age-appropriate learning, that learning that will be brought to a child, which is learner-centric. Firstly, that the main stakeholders, the policy seeks to empower the learners, the teachers who are the vehicles of that change, and the educational institutions, whether they are schools or whether they are higher education institutions. And in this, as schools, our focus would be that we move away from the rigid schooling structure, and from the middle school onwards, we are saying that we will do away with the hard separations that are currently existing between the curricular subjects, the co-curricular subjects, the extracurricular subjects, and the watertight compartmentalization of knowledge domains into arts and science and commerce and vocational subjects and academic subjects. We have realized that knowledge is a porous factor, is a porous entity, and that knowledge permeates into one another, and that individual capacities are also very unique. So the current system condemns a child who does not perform in subjects like math, science, or English as being a failure, as being a dropout, adding to the stress and making that person feel that he is a non-productive, he is a fool, or he is not capable of contributing in any manner, which is highly fallacious because we have multiple talents. We can be good sports persons, we can be good at music, we can be good at a vocational craft, we can be good at dance, or we can be good at languages, or we can be good at social sciences, and all this go to make a society. It is not just the doctors and the engineers that go to make a society. It is all these aspects that go, all these talents and all these capabilities and all these capacities that go to make it. Therefore, in the schooling system, we would like to see a teaching learning, the transaction of the teaching learning moving away from rote-based learning where we are testing the memory to actually having other aspects being tested, meaning the competencies of the child, the critical thinking ability, promoting or instilling a spirit of inquiry, developing their scientific temper, and applying of what they have learned, the concepts, into real life, contextualizing that learning into localized context, These are the changes that we are looking at in the teaching learning methodologies and the pedagogies. So the teacher who has been used to being a fixed curriculum and being told that this is what needs to be transacted and it is to be done in this manner, where there is no active learner engagement in the class at all, and therefore there is no active learning that is taking place, and children are merely memorizing what is being given to them in pre-printed textbooks, is not allowing for real learning at all. And that is sought to be transformed through the active learning pedagogies that will have to be adopted, and the teacher playing a very active role, proactive role in trying to involve the learner in the learning process, rather than the other way around, where the teacher is trying to teach and no learning is taking place. The other way around, where the learner is being asked to be involving himself or herself with the curricula, in the curricular engagement, through multiple activities, through practice sessions, through projects, through vocational crafts, and by learning within what is happening in that localized context. Therefore, textbooks would be bilingual. The textbooks will have only the broad curricula that will be brought out, and a substantial part would be left to the states to incorporate, so that children relate themselves to the kind of examples that are there in the textbooks. And we are trying to talk in terms of assessments, totally changing from the high stakes exam to formative assessments, where competencies would be tested, where applications of knowledge would be tested, and to ensure that it is not just memory-based learning. So this whole active learning, where the curricular transaction, the teaching learning pedagogies, and the assessment tools, and finally the examination systems itself, will undergo transformative changes, for which capacity building for teachers will have to be very, very critical, and only then we can bring about a nurturing the unique potentials of every child. Embedded within this is the other scientific principle of multilingualism, and that as a country which has diverse languages being spoken and diverse tongues being spoken, our obsession only to teach and learn in English, by which the child is denied the richness of other languages, and the fact that there is evidence to say that if children learn in one's own mother tongue, their cognitive abilities are much, much doubled, has led us to believe that in early stages or in early classes, at least up to grade 3, that we would like to have.
Dr. Shakila,
yes.
Just a reminder,
Yes.
5 minutes more. If you could wind up within that time, we will keep to the time limit. Just a reminder.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. The fact that multilingualism at that stage would contribute to the cognitive development is where we have said that we will allow for the home language or the local language being taught in the early stages. This is not to say that the policy has prevented or precluded the learning of English or other languages. It is only bringing in a flexibility where schools can continue to teach in their languages that they are most familiar with. But from the child's point of view, we are trying to promote the home language. At the same time, this entire changes that we are talking about looks at equity aspects, where we have said that the socially and the economically disadvantaged groups who belong to the SCs, the STs, the OBCs, minorities, children with different abilities, learning disabilities, girls, transgenders, urban poor, will all be brought into the mainstream for ensuring their educational participation through multiple interventions of enhanced scholarships, multilingual teaching, making sure that textbooks are available in local languages, so that you bridge the learning gaps between those who are coming from the marginalized and allow them to come up along with the general average. I would rest my case over here as far as the NEP 2020 is concerned, and take on questions relating to the school governance and the school complexes and so on at the interactive stage. I would just like to end by saying that the entire recommendations on school education is respecting the fact that we are living in the 21st century, and our students cannot just be given knowledge in single disciplines, and we should empower them with the kind of 21st century skills which also makes them sensitive to gender, sensitive to constitutional values, and also contribute to the environment and ensure safe living, prevent them from harm, so that when the challenges of tomorrow come about, where technology is taking over jobs, they are equipped with the right kind of knowledge, capabilities, and skills. Through empowering them, empowering the teachers, and ensuring that institutions have the enabling ecosystems to allow for the flowering of individual potentials and talents. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Thank you, Dr. Shakila, for explaining everything so clearly. And we understand your passion. We wish we could have given you a bigger duration time, but time constraints again. So before we go over to the next speaker, once again, a reminder to our participants, please do post your questions and all regarding what ma'am said. If you have any clarifications that you seek, do not forget to post it in the chat box. Also post your name and the name of your institution. So may I now call upon Reverend Father Joe Stanikil, CMI Principal, Carmel Higher Secondary School, Chalakudin, to introduce our next speaker, Dr. K. Jayakumar, IAS. Father, please.
Dr. Jayakumar.
So I would call upon Shri K. Jayakumar IAS to now present his viewpoints on the NEP. As I understand, he has quite a different viewpoints here, and we'd love to hear from you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Am I audible and visible? I hope I am audible and visible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. And how much time have I got? How much time can I take?
Sir, if you could keep it to that.
How much? I didn't hear.
20 minutes, sir.
20 minutes. Okay, maybe less than that. Right. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to be part of this panel discussion on the new education policy 2020. I listened to what Madam had to say, Shakila Shamsu had to say. I think we had participated in another program also as co-panelists without seeing each other except on this medium. I have been able to I participated in a couple of seminars or webinars on new education policy. It's a very ambitious policy, and within a span of 20 minutes, it is not easy to do any justice to the main issues raised in the education policy. At the outset, let me say that drafting an education policy for a country as diverse and as complex and as difficult as India is not an easy job. So I should compliment Kasturi Rangan and his colleagues, his team, for drafting a fairly comprehensive policy. They have done a good job. And I should compliment them further as a person who has gone through rather assiduously, rather meticulously the draft policy that was circulated a year ago. I should admit that the new education policy in its final shape, in NEP 2020, in its final shape is far more cogent, trimmer, lighter, and it addresses some of the issues far more effectively than the draft had threatened, I should say, if I may use the right word. The draft had a lot of threatening provisions which gratefully are not to be found in the final NEP 2020. Having said this, I should, after having complimented the architects of this policy, I should also say that policy is not a directive. Policy is only a set of wishful thinking or aspirational statement. Now, if this aspirational statement has to be translated into action and policy, and things have to change in the education sector, a lot of administrative decisions, a lot of financial decisions, a lot of political decisions, need to be taken, and for which a fractured polity may not be useful. Rather, the central government will have to hold all the states together under its umbrella in this federal setup, because education, after all, is subject in the concurrent list of the Constitution, and therefore the central government has its own limitations in implementing this policy effectively. The first point is that while finding large number of good points on this this policy, the success of the policy determines entirely on the ability to take together the state governments in the implementation process by designing meaningful and well thought out programs, policies, and financial incentives, and even social engineering to a great extent. I have been part of many All India assessment programs and evaluation programs, including DPEP, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, and all that. So I had opportunity to travel to many states, including Bihar and West Bengal and Rajasthan, and many states I have traveled as part of the teams to assess the educational achievements and attainments. And I should say that India is it's a varied mosaic. India, especially the education in India, school education in India, represents a very varied mosaic of impressions that you gather. It is not homogeneous. Highly heterogeneous situations prevail in India's education sector when it comes to the educational attainments, educational infrastructure, educational motivation of the society and the parents and the teachers. India represents a very, very heterogeneous picture. Now, coming to the policy, I should say that the education policy which deals with the provisions which deal with the school education are much better. Those sections are much better and acceptable than the sections dealing with the higher education, which I am not going to touch today because I have my own personal apprehensions about the implementability, the practicality, and even the desirability of some of the provisions of the pertaining to the higher education section. So I shall confine myself to the school education aspects of this policy. Now, changes suggested in the school education sector are far too sweeping. That is my first observation. I'm not saying that they are good or bad. Most of them are good. I'm admitting that. But the scope of these changes contemplated is far too sweeping to be realistic. That is why I said when I had opportunity to travel across the country and meet with the educational administrators and visit many schools, I have found that India is a very, as I said, a mosaic of multiplicity or multiple situations prevailing in different states. And they have their roots in the politics, history, and culture of a particular state. It cannot be changed overnight. That being the factor, that being the reality, these far sweeping changes suggested in the policy, it cannot be implemented without the wholehearted cooperation and involvement and participation of the state governments. And if we do a half-hearted work, without the full implementation or without the full participation of the state governments, without their political and administrative commitment, I think we will be distorting the existing picture and will not arrive at the desired point. At the same time, we would have started from our starting point without reaching the destination. We will be stranded midway in rather difficult situation. Therefore, the far too sweeping changes have to be addressed very carefully. The second point is that the structure, the structure of the school education from the existing 10+2 has been changed to, or being suggested to be changed into 5+3+3+4. Into the first 5, the 2 years of preschooling is being added. Now, it is a major shift in policy. There are a lot of advantages in having the pre-primary education or ECC, early childhood education care, into the mainstream school system. There are a lot of advantages. There are a lot of apprehensions. But the school edifice or the school system of 5+3+3+4, it actually distorts the existing picture. But at the same time, if we are able to stabilize this new structure, I'm sure there are a lot of merits in it. But one should not overlook the Herculean administrative tasks involved in making this changeover a success story. I'll come to that in a minute. Then the policy says that the whole idea is to align, or the new education policy is an instrument to align with the aspirational goals of the 21st century. That is the operative word of the policy. What is the whole purpose of this policy is to realign or to redesign our educational architecture and approach in such a way that our youngsters or our educational system is able to align itself with the aspirational goals of the 21st century. Now, they are wonderful words, but aspirational goals of the urban middle class living in Bombay or Mumbai or Chennai or Delhi or even Cochin, and the aspiration of a boy who is going to a Sarkari school in a remote village, in one of our states. These two aspirations are entirely different. His aspirations to complete +2 or take up the job of his father. He might be a metallurgist or he must be a carpenter or whatever. There is nothing wrong in that. His aspiration reaches only up to that level. Whereas when we say aspirational goals of the 21st century, I think we have predominantly the urban middle class in our mind, and in this policy, and rightly so, is tailor-made to realize the aspirational goals of the highly mobile, highly sort of ambitious, aspirational middle class, of the urban middle class, or the Mufussil town middle class, who are trying to aspire to be on par with developed countries or developed metropolitan cities. There is no harm in that. I'm not making a value judgment. But the aspiration is also not homogeneous in this country. Aspiration of the urban rich and the urban poor and the aspiration of the rural poor are entirely different. Aspiration of the tribal people, aspiration of the scheduled caste population in remote villages are not the same aspiration as the aspirations of a young gentleman or a young girl living in a middle class family in Mumbai or Delhi. Therefore, aspiration also requires to be qualified. Now that takes me to one of my trenchant criticisms about this policy, being that this policy makes wonderful statements and I'm happy about it. But it is like the diagnosis of a doctor who prescribes very good medicines after diagnosing the patient. Medicines are excellent. The medicines are very expensive. Medicines are very effective. But unfortunately, the diagnosis is wrong. If the diagnosis is wrong, your medicines are not going to be of any use. I may, with due respect to Kasturi Rangan committee members, I should say that the diagnosis of this report is not correct. I say this because I worked as a bureaucrat for nearly 8 years in school education and another 5 to 7 years in higher education. So I'm not just saying like making an off-the-cuff remark. Why I'm saying that this policy depends, or rather grounds its findings on wrong assumptions is: one, what are the major ills assailing or afflicting our school education sector? The participants who are attending this meeting should not generalize the situation in Kerala with the situation in Rajasthan or Bihar or Madhya Pradesh or Jharkhand or any such places like that. What are the ills of our education system? Basically, it is poor quality in school education. That doesn't mean that your higher education is world class, not at all. But your school education, the major problem, the major lacuna that we have wasted so many years is that we have not been able to achieve a minimum quality in our school education. When I say minimum quality in school education, the child is not with you from class 1. Why? Have you addressed it? Why is it that the student is not with you from class 1, class 2, class 3, up to class 10 or 12? And finally, we are being very generous with examination, and this policy further makes the examination process even more generous, saying that we will have 2 public examinations, or we will make examinations much easier for the child so that he passes. Now, making him pass an examination without having attained certain entitlements or the what he should learn from the classroom, is it a fair thing? Is it a moral thing to do? So making examinations easier is not the answer. Designing a policy is not the answer for your problem of dropout. It is not the answer for the problem of your poor quality in education. It is not the answer for your teacher absenteeism. It is not the answer to the highly immoral practices that prevails in many parts of this country when it comes to public examination in the school system. Haven't we seen a photograph of parents climbing up the 3rd floor of some educational institution where they are trying to give the answer sheets to the students writing public examination? There is a big ladder, and teachers and parents are helping each other so that their ward is given the pre-written answer sheets. So this is the country that we are in. That is why I said we are an immorally heterogeneous country. So therefore, does this policy really address these cardinal issues of dropout, student dropout, of gender inequality, then poor quality of education, teacher absenteeism, and poor infrastructure in the schools. I don't think this policy has any answers for this. But at the same time, it's not a bad policy, as I said. For the issues they have diagnosed, they have the right answers, and let us come to those answers. Now, the answers is ECC, early childhood care and education, becoming part of the school education. I'm a votary for that because it is much better that young children at the age of 4 or 3.5 or 4 are taken into the school system and treated like very young children, and they are initiated in the school system. The school-going habits also develops in them. It is much better than the present system of highly commercialized exploitation in the LKG, UKG setup. You go to any part of this country, you can find, come the month of February or May, you will find boards saying that LKG, UKG admissions open. And what are the fees? 1,50,000 rupees, 25,000 rupees, I think is non-existent. It doesn't exist anymore. Minimum 50,000 rupees, even in Kerala. 1 lakh in better off schools. For what? For what? To be taught English in the most unscientific manner possible by the least qualified teachers. Taking that into account, ECC being made part of the school education is an improvement. But then there are problems. The policy also says that how are we going to get the teachers to the ECC section? They say the Anganwadi teachers will be trained. I was very glad to read that. But the next line after that disappointed me. It says we will train them through online training. Anganwadi teachers being given an online training to become ECCE teachers, I think it is too far-fetched an imagination to be true. And what is the kind of quality assurance that you can give to these teachers? What is the alternative? I don't know. I'm only criticizing, I'm only commenting on the provisions in the policy. There might be alternatives. But then taking into the school section is good, provided we are able to give better quality education, the right kind of education, without burdening them with rote learning and things like that. And it is an advancement, improvement about what happens today. But even after taking your ECC into the school section, there is no guarantee, nor can be anybody guarantee that this commercialized LKG, UKG system will prevail, because they are being nurtured by the CBSE and ICSE schools as the feeders to their English medium schools. The policy says, I don't say half-heartedly, the policy says that mother tongue education will be encouraged. But is it practical? I have been the Vice Chancellor of the Malayalam University that we set up in Kerala, founder Vice Chancellor. I must have made 1,000 talks all over Kerala about the importance of mother tongue education. But people are so fascinated by English education that if you teach anything in the LKG to an LKG student in Malayalam or mother tongue, the parents take the teachers to task, saying that we did not give you money to teach them Malayalam, teach them English. So the poor teacher is forced to teach whatever little English he or he knows. Most of them it will be wrong English. And once you damage the linguistic faculty of the child, for lifelong, that linguistic faculty will be impaired. So what is the alternative in this policy to see that there is going to be some kind of homogeneity about the early childhood care and education segment, which is now becoming part of the school? It will become part of the government school, aided schools. It might also become part of the CBSE schools. But then your mother tongue education is not going to succeed in CBSE schools as long as our society does not realize and our policies do not take into cognizance this kind of fashionable predilections for English at the expense of not learning your mother tongue. Kerala is worse. I think Tamil Nadu is better, Karnataka is better, many North Indian states are better when it comes to mother tongue education. It is only the urban centers which have a fascination for English. Of course, it is spreading to village areas also. Now, without being reminded, I'll come back. Now, I also said about examination being flexible and easy. I have my own reservations about it. Another point is about flexibility in choosing subjects at the high school level, not the high school, maybe at the, when you go to 3+4 at the last stage, the four years, that is 9, 10, 11, 12, the policy says there will be flexibility in choice between vocational subjects and academic subjects. It is a good idea with bad consequences in India. Because our society has, even look at the vocational higher secondary schools in Kerala. Who goes to vocational higher secondary schools? If you have no option to get into even very unfashionable course in +2, then only you go to vocational higher education. Vocational education, unfortunately, has not received the kind of recognition and importance and respectability and acceptability in the Indian situation. Therefore, trying to sort of push the students from vocational to academic, they may have practical impediments in our situation. Now we come to teacher empowerment. All these things are possible provided the teacher is fully empowered. But how do we empower the teachers? I should complement the policy in suggesting an integrated 4-year B.Ed course from the existing very small duration B.Ed courses. It's a very good idea to have a 4-year integrated B.Ed course. Our universities should be asked to do that. But if you go to revisit the higher education segment of the policy, the universities are no longer going to be in existence. The policy talks about a wonderful future where every college is going to be autonomous. Now we can think about autonomous colleges if they have the sufficient wherewithal and academic discipline to do that. But colleges which are near bordering on anarchy, if they are given autonomy, autonomy will be equated to anarchy. Now if this anarchy, if this anarchy is going to prevail, what is the kind of B.Ed courses that we are going to think about? So some of these provisions do not gel with each other. I'm happy that a 4-year B.Ed course is a very good thing because that empowers a teacher and makes her competent to deal with the multiple issues in the classroom. Now, I'm not saying that this policy is outright not good. It is a very good policy. But the last point, I would say that the success of any policy for that matter depends how best or how good you can implement it. It is the implementation that makes a policy good or bad. Policy documents are all pious wishes. And in a complex area like school education or education in India, which is a concurrent subject of the state. It was originally a state subject, subsequently brought into the concurrent list, which was not a bad idea, but now it is in the concurrent list. Without the state governments coming into the picture, this policy will not be of any good. Therefore, I would request all those powers that be to implement this policy with the active involvement of the state governments. And every state government has its own history and a very kaleidoscopic picture of school education and education sector in their state, conditioned and fashioned by its history, by its economics, by its sociology. Therefore, the government of India should be resilient enough, should have the large-heartedness to synthesize the diverse opinions of the state governments while implementing this policy and while coming out with programs and financial incentives and that kind of packages to make this policy successful. One last point. It is very easy to suggest sweeping changes and overhauling structural changes in education. But one should also imagine that institutions that have been there for several years have slowly sort of settled and they have stabilized. Now to create a new institution means that you are going to be in an unstable situation before things settle down for the next 20 years or so. Now I think this kind of sweeping, such a cataclysmic changes is not called for. That is the one point I have to say. This kind of far-reaching, sweeping changes are not really essential to achieve the really ailing issues of India's school education. Namely, if I may recap, namely your poor quality of education, teachers absenteeism, students drop out, and general, I should say, lack of commitment on the part of managements and sometimes the teachers in giving quality education, and your excessive obsessiveness about getting A+ in all the examination orientation rather than the character building and the knowledge building aspect of education suffers, is being sacrificed at the altar of examination. To that extent, lightening the examination is good, but without compensating the academic content of the education, lightening the examination may not be a good thing. There are a lot of bundles, a bundle of contradictions. It is not easy. That is why I complimented this committee for coming out with recipes and recommendations, but it has not taken into account the diversity of complexities that we suffer. But within all these complexities, it is still possible for individual institutions like the host institution that we are facing now. All these institutions can take out the best recommendations and try out them in their own way by empowering our teachers, empowering our parents, and empowering our students without waiting for even the government to act, without going for major structural changes the good aspects of this policy could be tried out in our institutions so that we can condition our institutions to be the receptacles of these far-reaching changes. I only hope that this policy is implemented with precision, with a lot of moderation, as well as active involvement of all the stakeholders. Thank you very much. I think I have kept to my time slot.
Thank you, sir. You are well within your time. And being the dynamic personality that you are, we expected no less of a dynamic talk from you. You've already raised hackles among our audience, and they've started posting questions, which we'll be dealing with later on. Once again, a reminder to our audience, kindly fill in the feedback forms and please do submit it. Otherwise, you would not be getting a participation certificate. So may I now call upon...
To answer these questions. So I have to stay on to answer these questions.
If you could, sir, if you could, after one more talk.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so may I now call upon Reverend Father Franco Chitilpalli, CMI. May I now call upon Reverend Father Franco Chitilpalli, CMI Principal, St. Aloysius Higher Secondary School, Elthurut, to introduce our next speaker, Reverend Father Dr. Anil Kongot, CMI. Thank you, Reverend Father Franco Chitilpalli, CMI. And now it is over to Reverend Father Dr. Anil Kongot, CMI. He's the last speaker for today's session. Following this, we'll be having the audience clarification session. Over to you, Father.
Thank you. Thank you. Respected Provincial Father Dr. Davis Panikel, Dr. Shakila T. Shamsu, and Sri K. Jayakumar IAS, the resource persons of the day. Reverend Father Francis Kurisheri, the Counselor for Education and Mass Media, CMI Devamada Province, Thrissur. Respected managers, principals, teachers, participants, and my dear friends, good evening to one and all. Thank you, Father Franco, for the kind words and introduction. The former speaker spoke extensively on the policy, its intent, vision, especially with a special emphasis focus on general education. And therefore, my job is more than half done, but I will focus more on higher education and research. First of all, I would like to congratulate Dr. Shakila Shamsu as a member secretary of the committee that drafted and come out with an excellent document that will be decisive in shaping the future of our nation in the years to come. As a policy document, to my mind, this is a brilliant document that identifies the real problems and comes out with excellent solutions. However, not without apprehensions or concerns by various stakeholders, especially about the implementation, which is addressed towards the end of this document. If you look at the evolution of this policy, I would like to share my screen. So the evolution of this education policy, you can see the timeline over the years since the independence of our nation. Now, the Kasturirangan Committee report came on 31 May 2019, the draft, which had 484 pages, as Sri Jayakumar mentioned, which was had some objectionable content, but then it was refined and confined to some 66 pages and approved by the cabinet, the National Education Policy 2020. Politicians and political parties will be interested in distributing kits and soaps because that brings dividends in quick time in terms of votes. But envisioning education can be done only by bright minds, enlightened minds, like Dr. Kasturirangan, Manjul Bhargava, and Dr. Shakila Shamsu. And we are glad that Dr. Shakila Shamsu is here to enlighten us this webinar as well. As the famous quote says, if you plan for 1 year, plant rice. If you plan for 10 years, plant trees. But if your plan is for 100 years, educate children. If we all know the role of the teachers, we play different roles, sometimes as that of the instructor, sometimes disciplinarian, sometimes guide, mentor, many a time as a parent and sometime as friend. But from the perspective of the national education policy, the teachers are seen as the nation builders. Teachers are engaged in the process of building up the nation by inspiring young minds, equipping them, engaging them, laying foundations, by instilling values, by inculcating skill sets. We are not merely teaching physics, mathematics, or languages, but we are in the process of creating scientists, artists, doctors, technicians, thinkers, philosophers. We are creating tomorrow's India. Therefore, national education policy places education, or higher education for that matter, at this highest perspective, and it is rightly so. And if you look at the principles of the policy that is enshrined the beginning of the policy, flexibility, that gives a lot of autonomy and empowerment to the teacher and to the institution. Then multidisciplinary and a liberal education, and equity and inclusion is taken care of, and respect for diversity, respect for local context, that is enshrined in this policy, and it ensures community participation, use of technology, and the importance of life skills and values and ethics. These are the principles that underline this policy. And the vision of the policy, transforming India sustainably into an equitable and vibrant knowledge society by providing high quality education to all. Now, if we look at the higher education scenario in India, the present scenario, do we really need this document? Are we not doing well in higher education? What about our degree programs? What about our post-graduation programs? Are they not good enough? Are we not doing good enough in research? We are giving COVID vaccines to the rest of the world. Are we not doing well? Why affiliation systems should be phased out? Why B.Ed college should be closed down? For such a huge population, why the number of higher education institutes should be reduced? Why such massive and drastic changes that in such huge magnitude? In other words, how does India fare in higher education? How does India fare in research? Let us see some of the statistics. Now, NEP projects the gross enrollment ratio in India to be 50% by 2035. But you see the current situation. What is gross enrollment ratio? 100 students between the age of 17 and 22 in India, only 26 are going to the colleges, higher education. But what are the situation elsewhere? If you look at countries like United States, that's about 90%. If you look at Germany, it is around 66% over here. And if you look at countries like BRICS countries like Brazil, which is about 45%, China 40%, and even the countries like Vietnam and South Korea ahead of us, ahead of India. South Korea, the gross enrollment ratio is about 94%. I think comparison between South Korea and India is a good case to ponder about. Both have got the history of colonization. Both have the history of, the partition, India into India and Pakistan, Korea into South Korea and North Korea. And both countries had bloodsheds post-partition in India and in South Korea, around 3 million people died. But India was freed in 1947, South Korea in 1948. But see the condition now, the disparity between South Korea and India. It is much, much wider than what we can think of. So, and even if we think about the number of, the Indian universities, all the world ranking, the number of universities that comes under 100 best universities in the world, not even a single university appears in the list. And if we take the best 500 universities in the world, only 9 appear in the list. But from South Korea, 5 comes under the best 100 universities in the world. So it's a different case. And if you look at the patents, here I have this statistics on the patents in 2018. The world total is 253,000 patents. And from among them, how does each country fare? US has got 56,142 and China 53,345. And in 2020, the number of patents, China has gone ahead of US. Now, what about other countries? South Korea has got 17,000. And where is India standing? India has got little more than 2,000 patents. So the disparity between India and rest of the countries who are going ahead is huge. And if you take the number of patents per million population, the figure of India is going to be negligible because we have got a huge population. But that of South Korea is going to be very, very high because the population less, the number of patents are much more. So if we come to the content of the, the document, the policy document, what are the major reforms? What are the key reforms that are proposed? So only those higher education institutions with more than 3,000 students are going to stay by 2040. Now, what is going to happen with the other institutions? Now, 50% gross enrollment ratio by 2035. But if you take the statistics of last 5 years, the improvement has been just 2%, which is the organic growth. And if you want to have such a huge leap, we want to do something extraordinary. And there are wonderful suggestions like multidisciplinary and liberal education, flexibility that is envisioned here. Like, Bachelor of Liberal Arts, Bachelor of Liberal Education, which is proposed for, 4-year integrated programs. and our normal undergraduate programs of 3 years, Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science. And it also looks at, exit options. When you complete 1 year of UG program, you can exit with one diploma certificate. And if you exit after 2 years, you can take away an advanced diploma. So these are the flexibilities that are incorporated. And if you have completed a 4-year BLA or BLE, you can do a 1-year master's program as well. And this policy, decides to or proposes to discontinue with the MPhil program as well. And the higher education institutes are going to be reframed as coming under 3 sections like, research intensive universities, teaching focused universities, and those autonomous colleges. And therefore, when affiliated system is going to be discontinued, it is definitely of the concern for many of the institutions that are staying right now, having number of students much less than maybe 100 or 200 or so. So that is a real case to be considered. Another important reform, a very positive reform, would be credit transfer, or the concept of academic bank of credits. Today, if somebody does a UG program in Northeast or elsewhere, if they come back to Kerala or any other state, there are problems of equivalencies. And I think the credit transfer will solve such issues. And graded autonomy, and this is indeed a great suggestion, but the concerns of the infrastructure and the preparedness from every aspect is still in question. And this phasing out of affiliation system, how and when, the logistics, the infrastructure, all these things are to be considered. And as of now, there are several regulatory systems which is going to be replaced by a single regulatory system. And the question is, why a single regulatory system? Why can't UGC or MCI can be empowered further? Renaming or bringing a new regulatory system, will it solve the issues? Will it solve the problems? This is a point to be thought about. Now, it also welcomes foreign universities to set up campuses in India. It, of course, gives exposure, and it allows or invites Indian universities to set up, campuses in other countries as well. It is, visibly a welcome step towards the internationalization and more exposure to the students as well. And this is an excellent suggestion to have National Research Foundation to fund the researchers, to identify best research projects, and to improve, to enhance the quality and the quantity of research that is taking place in the country. If you look at these statistics, the amount of money that is spent for research and development in different countries, if you look at that of India, only 0.9% of GDP is spent for research, which has again come down since 2015. This is the statistics of 2015. But if you look at that of South Korea, it is 4.3% of GDP for the research and development. And for Israel, it is for 4.9%, and many other countries. The amount that is spent for research and development is much more than what we have. So the projection to spend 6% of GDP for research and development, I think it is a little more than ambitious. And the number of research papers that are published in different countries, and not only that, the quality of the resource papers. Here, how many of our papers get noticed? Here we have the citations per document. The number of papers that are cited or getting noticed from India is much less than in comparison with that of many other countries that are going ahead of us. And if you look at the researchers per 10,000 labor force, if you look at the figure of United States, it's 79. For United Kingdom, UK, it is 79, but that of India is a meager number of 4. So it also shows the shoddy research work that is taking place in a country. Therefore, the concept of National Research Foundation is definitely a welcome step. However, the implementation is again going to be the key in this aspect. About teacher education, I think Sri K. Jayakumar has already drew the attention by the flexibility that is presented, 4-year integrated B.Ed, and then there is 2-year B.Ed program for the normal bachelor holders, and we also have 1-year B.Ed to the holders of Bachelor of Liberal Arts and Bachelor of Liberal Education, etc. And we also the policy also puts forward the concept to have vocational education to at least 50% of all learners at various levels, including higher education. And I think that is an excellent suggestion, because vocational education many a time are looked down upon, and if this is achieved, it will definitely help India in achieving higher heights of achievements in the years to come. And professional education, right now we have technical universities, agricultural universities, and also health universities, but this document proposes to integrate all these, not having separate universities, but bring agriculture and engineering together, or data science and agriculture together. That will bring dividends in the larger perspective. And it also proposes to rename the Ministry of Education as, MHRD as Ministry of Education. I don't know what difference does it make. And Dr. Shakila Shams also mentioned the importance of mother tongue. If you have a research program from Germany, it is published in German, or if it is from Spain, it is published in Spanish. But in our country, if a research finding is taking place, or the research, the thought happens in mother tongue, it will, I think, the research output will be much better than if it is done than what is done in a foreign language. And the use of technology in higher education for planning, for teaching, for learning and assessment, for e-governance like administration and management, for regulation, for bringing in transparency and optimization of learning process, and to reach out to the disadvantaged ones like the differently able ones. Technology will be of great use. And finally, a thought on how these things will take place. The document proposes an apex advisory board for education, national Indian education, namely National Education Commission. And as the document rightly points out, and policy will be as good as its implementation. So when we think about this policy, I think we should critically think about the implementations. The policy has rightly identified the challenges, limitations, deficiencies. However, all necessary measures should be taken to ensure that the remedy doesn't worsen the disease. For example, the first challenge, fragmented education system with more than 50,000 higher education institutions in the country, but to replace with large multidisciplinary universities and colleges. But what about the implementation? How practical it is going to be? What about the logistics? What happens to the existing systems? That is to be thought about. And then the volume of higher education system in India, it is both a challenge and an opportunity in comparison with many European countries. But I think China is showcasing how successfully it can be handled and implemented. And in the hunt for improving the gross enrollment ratio, temptation to compromise the quality, especially via the proposed open distance learning, should be restrained. And if you look at the present scenario, we have big promises on the research. If we look at since 2017, Most of the colleges in India have not been funded for major or minor research projects. And so, therefore, the intent is not explicated in the implementation or execution. So a national education policy for a country as diverse as India, in terms of the terrains, the geography, the culture, the economy, the development, is indeed challenging. I think the policy is doing enough to accommodate this diversity. Therefore, we should retrospectively think about the previous policies and introspect as to how far we have achieved, how much we have realized our goals, and prospect this new policy accordingly with due caution and thoughtfulness. In spite of these concerns and about implementation as a policy document, National Education Policy 2020 is futuristic, positive, and innovative. NEP 2020 lays out an encouragingly hopeful vision for the future and hope of our nation that is at the threshold of becoming a superpower. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Father Dr. Anil Kongoth, for your valuable take on this very controversial, shall I say, topic, because we have a stream of questions from different parts of India now. And I would especially like to mention the teachers of Carmel Higher Secondary School, Chalakudi, who have, expressed their appreciation of this wonderful webinar, and especially thanked all the panelists for their wonderful views. And may I now take up a question? I would like to address this to Shakila ma'am. Priya Kuriakos has asked, what measures have the NEP taken to create awareness among the parents? Because usually we have the by-hearting system here. So Shakila ma'am, could you answer this very briefly, please?
Yeah, the policy would have to have advocacy to be done in terms of actually educating the parents about the new features that are being proposed. At the level of, and as I must use this opportunity to reaffirm what eminent Dr. Jayakumar ji has mentioned, that taking the states on board, accepting the heterogeneity of the level of preparedness that we have, and also having the right kind of advocacy for schools and teachers and parents and the students themselves towards implementing this policy is very, very critical. But at the same time, the kind of awareness that we need to do for parents would have to have, you can't have government starting to speak to parents. It has to be a mass awareness that is being done. It has to be there in public domain. It has to be, and as Jayakumar ji had mentioned, the aspirations of people are varied. So when you're talking to a parent of an urban middle class, that person's sensitization to the new reforms would be very, very easy than talking to a person in a rural area whose aspiration may not be to really learn in Malayalam language, but to learn in English. So the kind of advocacy that we do, and to make that kind of canvas of, very varied levels that we need to address, is definitely a challenge. What has been done is that the different state governments, I know that because I do it for a couple of state governments, where I'm trying to tell them that don't just talk to your functionaries, but also go down using your, BRCs and CRC workers, go down and start passing on the message that these are the likely changes that would come about. You see, any reform, any policy, as all of us have accepted, is as good as its implementation. Aspiration is easy to say on paper, but you need to actually use the grassroots level person who can go and talk to that parent, and that cannot be dictated from top down. You can't expect the Ministry of Education or a state government at the top to do that, but you have to do that using the chain network that is available, so that you can actually start reaching out to parents. And advocacy is one of the strong points that we are trying to emphasize in the implementation stage. So we expect bodies like the NCRT, the SCRT, the diets, the BRC, the CRCs, the schools themselves, the teachers, the managers of the educational systems to all start spreading the word around. We've been doing multiple numbers of webinars and doing lots of conferences. The IQAC cells of all the higher education institutions have been doing it. But finally, you need to bring about that kind of information. And I think this can only be done if you make it, taking it down to the person who works at the grassroots level. And that could be maybe the Anganwadi worker, maybe like for the COVID pandemic, I'm sure we would not have been able to tackle it without the ASHA workers. The same way the CRC and the BRC workers, they are the ones, they are the staff who need to actually approach for the reforms happening in the school education. It's much easier to, it is much easier for advocacy in higher education because you're dealing with students themselves who would be receptive to it. And the webinars that are being organized by the debating clubs of some of our higher education institutions speak volumes about the fact that students are trying to understand what has been the matrix of these reforms that are being proposed so that they can then take it forward. So I think it's advocacy at different levels that will have to be followed.
Okay, thank you, Shakila ma'am. And my next question would be to Jayakumar sir. I have here a teacher who has asked two questions. Vrishali Kate wants to know if a same syllabus for early education for the entire country is preferable, and also if we should go for the formal education as opposed to activity-based learning.
Yeah, it's a very self-evident question because I don't think we should attempt for a homogeneous curriculum for the whole of this country at the ECCE level, not at all. Because of course there should be certain core competencies which you should attain for your child, but in what way you are going to attain it, what is the medium, not only linguistic medium, but what are the stories you are going to tell, all these things, you know, the inputs, the details of the inputs have to be left to the region, to the sub-region probably, because that is the cultural milieu the child can sort of relate. And if we are going to give them one size fits for all for this whole country, I think we are in for irreversible disaster. So the second question was, what was that? I forgot about this. And then
activity-based learning should be replaced with the old type of formal education.
That of course, it has to be activity based, and I don't think this should be uniform. It has to be left to the imagination and creativity of the local teachers, or at least the local districts, if not doing that. That's it. I'm very clear on that.
Okay, a short question to Father Anil. Jasna Johnson K from St. Xavier's CMI School, Pullur would like to know that, the new policy now recommends 4 years of B.Ed course. So she wants to know how to empower teachers who have already completed the B.Ed course. I mean, are they going to be brought into the stream too?
Yeah, those who have already completed, I don't think they have to go through this process again, but this will be future oriented. But this gives more flexibility, the higher education system, the UG programs itself is much more flexible. So those who have completed their, normal UG program, they can undergo a 2-year B.Ed program. And those who have gone through a 4-year, BLA, that is Bachelor of Liberal Arts or Bachelor of Liberal Education, they can go for a 1-year, B.Ed. So that makes, those who have done already some UG program, it makes them easy for them to take up the B.Ed program.
Okay, thank you, Father Anil. Just a quick mention, quite a few teachers from the Devamada CMI Public School Thrissur have also expressed their appreciation for the panelists and the wonderful way in which they explained the topic. One quick question last to Shakila ma'am. Zainab Buhari wants to know what about all this fuss about the stress on English being the main language of teaching? I mean, is this practical in a country like India where you have different languages?
So the policy has not said that we should insist on English being the main medium of it. In fact, the policy has promoted multilingualism, and we are drawing the flag for having made that recommendation. How practical it is in this, one of the most challenging recommendations when we say up to grade 3 and preferably up to grade 5, if we could teach in our own home language or mother tongue, and where experiences have shown that children are drawn out of schools because we are teaching in the local languages. The challenge is to get teachers or identify teachers who can teach in the home languages. We have actually as a country done a lot of injustice to the linguistic plurality that we have in this country by maybe our colonial hangover. But the fact is, we are not dissuading anybody from not learning English at all. And we are saying that there is evidence to say that children can learn multiple languages at very young ages. And we need to actually leverage that kind of potential that children have. Rather than then saying that you only learn, we are actually saying that knowing English makes a person knowledgeable, which is highly a fallacious connect. It's absolutely not, there is no cause and effect at all that someone who speaks fluent English is more knowledgeable than someone who doesn't speak. Somehow that kind of a misnomer has been there in our mind, and we are seeking to say that as a country which has so many languages being spoken, can we empower our children? Otherwise, we would be a nation where we had a civilizational heritage where so many languages were spoken. 100 years down the line, those languages would have become either endangered or have totally vanished, and we would have lost out on that very rich cultural value, cultural heritage that we had in this country. So we are nowhere in this policy overemphasizing need for learning English language. For the first time in higher education, we have said that you can offer it in their own regional languages. So I think that is a landmark reform in higher education to allow students coming in from agrarian backgrounds and therefore who are hesitant to come into higher education, to actually enable them to come into higher education when you start offering it in Malayalam or Telugu or Tamil or Gujarati or Bengali or Odia and so on. So we have nowhere in the policy emphasized on English language as being the medium of instruction.
Thank you, Shakila ma'am. One last question to Jay Kumar sir. This is from Reverend Father Babu Paul, Principal, Christ Institute for Advanced Studies, Bangalore. Now, he feels slightly peeved that in the new education policy, there is absolutely no mention of the contributions by the minorities or the Christian educators. What do you have to say to that?
I don't have to say anything to that, but I think the policy is fair enough because the policy is going to give total freedom and autonomy to good institutions. Therefore, I don't think Father has any reason to be apprehensive. So whether the word minority is mentioned or not, if you're an aspiring good institution, you are going to get all the freedom and autonomy. Enjoy it. Beyond that, I don't think anything in the policy.
Yeah, truly, truly. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think now we'll wind up the session and go over to our vote of thanks. May I call upon Reverend Father Sunny Punneli Parambil, CMI, Principal, Devamada CMI Public School, Thrissur, to deliver the vote of thanks. Father, over to you.